All right, here we are again. This is chapter 3, chapter 2. This is page 117. We are doing lesson 4, percents greater than 100 and percents less than 1. So, the learning objective is kind of long. Let's read through it. I can write percents greater than 100 and less than 1 as decimals and fractions, and vice versa. So basically it means with numbers greater than 100 and less than 1, you can write them as decimals, you can write them as fractions, or you could turn a decimal and you could write it into a percent or a fraction you could write as a decimal or a percent. And we're all dealing with numbers greater than 100 and less than 1. So it makes it a little bit weird, but we're going to break it down for you and show you the best methods. So let's start right into page 118. Turn to page 118. And let's just look at here as an overview. The two parts of the lesson are percents as decimals and fractions, and then mixed numbers as decimals and percents. So starting out with a percent and turning it into a decimal or a fraction, or starting out with a mixed number and turning it into a decimal or a percent. That's what we're going to be doing. Now, let's do an overview of percents really quick. So a percent less than 1% equals a number less than 1/100th. So when a percent is less than 1, we're talking about a really small number. It's less than this. So it's almost like you would have a decimal here over the 100, like it's really small. A percent greater than 100 is a number greater than 1. So you're going to have bigger numbers or smaller numbers. You'll see what I mean. Let's take a look at this. It says percents greater than 100% or less than 1% can also be written as decimals or fractions. Now, take a minute to write this in because this is the method you want to use. When you have a percent greater than 100%, you're going to want to use the method where you write in mixed number, you write the percent in a mixed number fraction form. So write that in right here. When you have percents greater than 100, you want to write it in a mixed number or fraction form. However, when you have percents that are less than 1, then you want to do the move the decimal method. So this is the method you want to use for percents less than 1. Write that in. And this is the method that you want to use if it's greater than 100%. Let's look at the examples and I'll show you what I mean. So this first example is 0.2%. So it's less than 1%. So we're going to want to do the move the decimal method. So you have 0.2% as a decimal. You want to write it as a decimal, and then you want to write it as a fraction in simplest form. So when we change 0.2% to a decimal, you need to move the decimal point. So we're taking out the percent sign. You move the decimal point to the left because it's like you're dividing by 100. So you take this out, you move it 2 to the left. It's 0.002. Now that you have that, you can then turn it into the fraction. So we first turned it into a decimal. There's that. And now we need to write it as a fraction. So this is 2 in the thousandths place. So it's written as 2 thousandths. To simplify it, divide by 2, and you get 1 over 500. So 0.2% is 0.002 in decimal form, which is 2 thousandths in fraction form, simplified to this. Wow, we're mixing everything we've learned so far in this chapter together to do this. So when you have a percent less than 1 you start with the move the decimal method. Now let me just talk to you a minute about why you use this method. Because if you were to try to turn this into a fraction, if you were to try to use the fraction method, then it would look like this, which you can't do. You can't do 2/10 of 100ths. I don't even know how to say it. So since you can't put a decimal in the numerator of a fraction, you have to use the move the decimal method. So you must use the move the decimal method when you have percents less than 1. However, when you have a percent greater than 100, you should use the fraction method. In fact, you end up writing it as a mixed number. So watch, 170% is 170 hundredths. So that's how you write a percent as a fraction. You put 100 in the denominator. Now to simplify this, you have to change this to a mixed number. So you have, when you take away 100 from the numerator, you have 70 left. So it's 1 whole plus 70 hundredths. So 170 hundredths is 1 70 hundredths. Now, this can be written as a decimal. 1 70 hundredths is this. But, I mean, really, it's 1 7/10, because 70 hundredths can be simplified to 7/10. So decimal form is 1.7, 1 7/10. Now, could you move the decimal on this too? Sure. Move the decimal and you get 1.7. All right, we are going to practice this right now. It says write each percent as a decimal and a mixed number or fraction in simplest form. So we're going to have to get 2 answers. One of the answers is going to be as a decimal, and one of the answers is going to be a mixed number or fraction in simplest form. So we have a number, a percent, that's less than 1. If you have a percent less than 1, you need to do the move the decimal method. So we need to move the decimal 2 places to the left. So 0.25, take that out, move it 2 places to the left. That leaves you with 0.0025. So that's the first answer. That's the decimal answer, 0.0025. Now we have to write it as a mixed number or fraction in simplest form. So listen, this isn't tenths, this isn't hundredths, this isn't thousandths, this is 10,000ths. That's kind of mind-blowing. So as a fraction, this is 25 10,000ths. Let's simplify it. You should be able to divide by 25. So 10,000 divided by 25 is 400. So this is 1/400th. Wow. So our simplest form for the fraction is 1/400. Now, 300%. Now we have a number that's greater than 100, so we can write it in mixed number or fraction form. So 300% equals 300 over 100. 300 over 100 is a mixed number. Well, look, if you divide by 100, just saying, it's 3 over 1, so it's 3. So, as a decimal, it's what? I guess you would say 3.0, but as a fraction, it's 3. So essentially, you have the same answer, whether it's a decimal or a mixed number fraction, because it's just a whole number. Let's try 530%. 530% is 530 over 100. All right, let's simplify it. Let's turn it into a mixed number. So it's 5 hundredths, 5 whole, plus 30 left over. Now we can simplify this 30 over 100. If we divide by 10, it's 3/10. So that fraction is 5 3/10. So in fraction form, our answer is 5 3/10. How do you write 5 3/10 as a decimal? 5.3, 5 3/10. So 5.3 or 5 3/10. Now, did you think about this though? You can still move the decimal 2 to the left. So if you did move the decimal 2 to the left, see how you get 3.0? And if you move the decimal 2 to the left, it's 5.3. So you can still do the move the decimal for numbers greater than 100 to get the percent to a decimal. And then you could have written 5 3/10. So if you had for this one 530%, you move the decimal 2, that would have been 5.3, and in fraction form, that is 5 3/10. So that, I mean, I guess that's a faster method to get to it this way rather than setting it up as a fraction first. So whatever you're more comfortable with, go ahead and use. You can either use that move the decimal or writing it as a mixed number. However, when you have a percent less than 1, you always need to do the move the decimal method. Let's look at example 3. Jimmy's savings increased by 250%. Write 250% as a mixed number in simplest form and as a decimal. So 250%, they're going to start it with the fractions, is 250 over 100. That in mixed number form is 2 50 hundredths. If you divide by 50, simplest form is 2.5. All right, now 2.5, remember, is 2.5. If you remember back at that, where we're trying to recognize 0.5 as a half. So 2.5 is 2.5. Now look at this. You could just move the decimal too. Take that decimal, move it, and there's your 2.5. So 2.5, 2.5. There's the decimal, there's the mixed number in simplest form. All right, let's do this example. The stock price for a corporation increased by 0.11%. Write 0.11% as a decimal and as a fraction in simplest form. So it's smaller than 1. We have to do the move the decimal method. So let's move the decimal 1, 2. So we get the number 0.0011. So that's our decimal. However, we need to write it as a fraction. So tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths again. 11 10,000ths. Now, I don't think 11 can go into 10,000. I think that's in simplest form. Let's check. 10,000 divided by 11? Yeah, can't do it and get a whole number. So this is simplest form. 11 10,000ths. All right. So remember, when you have a percent and you're changing it to a decimal or fraction, either way, if it's greater than 100 or less than 1, you can always do the move the decimal method, but you have to start with the move the decimal method for percents that are less than 1. All right, you're going to need to know that for the reflection. Make sure you have that written down. Pause it and write it if you don't. Okay, we are on page 119 and we're going to switch gears now. Mixed numbers and decimals as percents. So what we're going to do is we're going to change a mixed number to a percent, and then down here we're going to change a decimal to a percent. It's just that we're going to be getting percents that are greater than 100, because this is 1.68, and we're going to get percents that are less than 1. So let's look at the two main points up here that I've numbered 1 and 2. I want you to number them and circle them like I did too, so you can have it stand out later when you're reviewing and writing your reflection. So number 1, to write a decimal as a percent, remember from the last lesson, you multiply by 100 and add a percent sign. That's what we learned in lesson 3. That is the move the decimal method. So circle this first sentence and write move the decimal method. Remember, you're moving it 2 to the right because you're multiplying by 100. In fact, go over to page 118 and add this. On this side, we moved it 2 to the left. Okay, now, when you're writing a mixed number as a percent, first you write the mixed number as an improper fraction. So that's something that you might not have done in a while, and we're going to do that in example 4 right here. I'm going to show you how to write a mixed number as an improper fraction. Because if you can get the mixed number as an improper fraction, then you can write an equivalent fraction to get 100 in the denominator. If you can get 100 in the denominator, then the numerator is your percent. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this mixed number, 1 1/4, and we're going to write it into an improper fraction. And then we eventually want to write it to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator, so we can take the numerator and call that our percent. I'm going to break this down a little slower for you. All right, you have the mixed number 1 1/4. So how do you write that as an improper fraction? Remember, this 1/2 right here is like saying you have 4/4. So if you have 4/4 plus 1 more, you have 5/4. Now, 5/4 can be turned into an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator by multiplying by 25. So here, 4 times 25 is 100. 5 times 25 is 125. Now, 125 over 100 means 125 is our percent. So to change this mixed number into a percent, we had to change it into an improper fraction, get 100 in our denominator, and then use the numerator as our answer. So we're going to try that right now with this example E. Right here, this is our practice. So the first thing we need to do is write this mixed number as an improper fraction. So 2 9/10, you've got 20/10 here plus 9, so it's 29/10. All right, so we wrote it as a mixed number, as an improper fraction. The mixed number turns to an improper fraction, and then we need to get 100 in the denominator. So 10 times 10 is 100. 29 times 10 is 290. So that is your percent, 290%. All right, let's break this one down. We have a mixed number. We need to turn it into an improper fraction. So you've got 3 times 5 here is 15 plus 2 more, 17/5. Now we need to turn this into an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator so we can find out what the percent is. 5 times 20 is 100. 17 times 20. Let's do that. 17 times 20 is 340. So it's 340%. Let's take a minute to break down these steps over here. So when you have a mixed number, write this down, a mixed number, and you're turning it into a percent, step 1 is write the improper fraction. Turn it into an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator, and then write the percent, which is going to be the numerator, right? It's this number right here is going to be your percent. So that's how you turn a mixed number into a percent. Now, for examples 5 and 6, we are going to be turning a decimal into a percent. And if you remember up here, we said to write a decimal as a percent, you want to do the move the decimal method. You're multiplying by 100, so you're moving it 2 to the right. So down here, this one's a little more simple than example 4. We move the decimal 2 to the right. It gives us 168. Add the percent sign, because when you do that moving the decimal, you're turning it into a percent. So it's 168%. Do the move the decimal here. 0.0075. Move the decimal 2 to the right. So then you take it out here, you put it here, 0.75%. So this is way quicker and more simple than this one here. All right, let's try these. So 2.5, we need to move the decimal 2 to the right. Take that out, put it here. You have 250. That's your percent. 250%. All right, 0.004. You're timesing it by 100, which means you move 2 to the right. 0.4 is your percent. All right, what about this? We've got to move our decimal 2 to the right. 1, 2. 0.16 is your percent. So when you are writing a decimal to a percent, go ahead and do the method of timesing by 100, which means move decimal 2 to the right. All right, now I believe there's one more example, just because there always is, on the next page. So let's turn to page 120 and look at the last example. The cheetah is the fastest land mammal in the world. The peregrine falcon is the fastest bird in the world. Its speed is 2.1 times as fast as the cheetah. Write this number as a percent. So we need to write 2.1 as a percent. And we said over here, when you have a decimal and you're turning it into a percent, you times it by 100, which means you move the decimal 2 to the right. So 2.1, move the decimal 2 places to the right, is 210%. So the peregrine falcon speed is 210% of the cheetah's speed. Let's do this little story problem. The slowest land mammal is the sloth. Its speed is about 0.0016 that of a cheetah. Write this number as a percent. When you're changing a decimal to a percent, multiply by 100, which means move the decimal point 2 to the right, which gives you 0.16%. 0.16%. Cool, so a recap before you do the guided practice. When you have percents and you're turning them into decimals and fractions, you could always move the decimal to 2 to the left because you're dividing by 100. So you move the decimal 2 to the left. If you want to, you can do the change the percent to a fraction method, but you can only do that for numbers that are percents greater than 100. Now, when you're trying to write mixed numbers and decimals as percents, if it's a mixed number, you have to change it to an improper fraction equivalent to a fraction with a denominator of 100. So then you can take the numerator and write it as a percent. If you have a decimal that you're turning into a percent, just do the method where you multiply by 100, which moves the decimal 2 to the right. So what do we have in store for guided practice? That's what's headed up next on page 120. All right, we're on page 120. For the guided practice, let's take a look at number 1. It says, write each percent as a decimal and as a mixed number or fraction in simplest form. So this is going to be like examples 1 through 3, where we were right here on that first page of the lesson. Now, this number is greater than 100. So if you want to do the fraction form, you can. This number, when we get here, it's less than 1. So you have to do the move the decimal method. Remember, in these ones, we're dividing by 100, so you move the decimal to the left 2 places. So 325 is like 325 hundredths. And to turn that into a mixed number, it's 3 25 hundredths. Now, 3 25 hundredths can be simplified. You can divide by 25, so it gives you a quarter. So you have 3 1/4. So that's your simplified fraction. But they also want you to write it as a decimal. So you can write this as, you can change this to a decimal if you want to change the denominator to 100. You would have to times by 25 times 25. So it's 3 25 hundredths, which is like 3 25 hundredths, which is what we had up here, by the way. So that's your decimal. Now, if you want to get the decimal by just moving, by dividing by 100, moving the decimal 2 to the left, that would look like this. And that's how you get 3.25 for the decimal. Let's do that way for number 2. Let's start by moving the decimal to the left to get the decimal answer, because remember, you have to get a decimal and a mixed number answer. So if you had 480 and you move the decimal 2 to the left, that gives you 4.8. So the decimal answer for this is 4.8. But they also want you to get a fraction in simplest form. So you could think of this as 4 8/10. 4 8/10 simplified, divide by 2, is 8 divided by 2 is 4, 10 divided by 2 is 5, so it's 4 4/5 for your fraction. Now again, if you wanted to, instead of starting with the move the decimal, you could have started with, I'm going to write it right here, 480 over 100. And that's 4 80 hundredths. And then you'd have to simplify 80 hundredths. I'd divide by 20. Oops. And that's going to give you your 4/5. So it would be 4 4/5 again. So there are different ways you can do it. However, for this one, when you have a percent less than 1, you have to move the decimal. So start it by dividing, moving the decimal 2 to the left. 1, 2. So that's 0.006. That's your decimal answer. Now we have to get our fraction answer. So this is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. 6 thousandths can be simplified. So we need to simplify this. Now, what do we need to divide by? Greatest common factor is 2. They can both be divided by 2. 3 500ths. And 500 can't be divided by 3. You can't get that any smaller. All right. So your fraction is going to be 3 500ths. Now, this first part of the chapter took a little longer. The second part of the chapter, remember, moves a little bit faster. So let's do 4, 5, and 6. And what we need to do is we need to write the mixed number as a percent, or we need to write the decimal as a percent. So we're writing things as percents here. Now, when you get down to these decimals, we're just going to use that method where you move the decimal 2 to the right. But when we have our mixed number, we have to have it as an improper fraction, change it to an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100 before we can get the percent. So let's do that one first. So let's change 1 4/5 to a improper fraction. Couldn't remember the name of that. So you have 1 times 5 is 5 plus 4 more, 9/5. Now we want to change that improper fraction to an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. 5 times 20 is 100. 9 times 20 is 180. So this is my percent, 180%. So 1 4/5 equals 9/5 equals 180 hundredths, which is 180%. Now, for these next two, when we start with a decimal, we're going to be multiplying by 100 to get to the percent. So 0.0015, move the decimal 2 to multiply by 100, 0.15%. Move the decimal 2 to the right, 1, 2, 275%. All right, that was the guided practice. The independent practice is going to be the next step. You're going to try this on your own. It's going to have the exact same types of problems as we had here. So you can refer back here, or you can refer back to the lesson pages and examples if you need help. Let's go to independent practice. All right, so independent practice for lesson 4, we are on page 121, and here's what we need to do. All right, we are going to do 6 of these. So in this first part, you have to write the percent as a decimal and a mixed number or fraction in simplest form. So you're going to have 2 answers. I want you to do number 1 and number 3. Now here's why. Number 1 is a number greater than 100 and number 3 is a number less than 1. So remember, for the number less than 1, you have to do the move the decimal method. You can do the move the decimal method for this too, but you don't have to, okay, because it's greater than 100. Now, for this next section, you're going to do 5 and 6, and you're writing each mixed number as a percent. So remember, you have to turn that mixed number into an improper fraction, do an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator, and then write the numerator as the percent. So that's what you're doing here. And then the third part, you're writing the decimal as a percent. You have to do the move the decimal method. So you're multiplying by 100, moving it 2 to the right. Up here, it's 2 to the left because you're dividing by 100. And down here, it's 2 to the right because you're multiplying by 100. So down here, I want you to do number 9 and number 11, because number 9, you've got a larger number. Number 11, you have a smaller number. So you're going to get a percent greater than 100 and a percent less than 100 for those, or less than 1, sorry. All right, so 1, 3, 5, 6, 9, and 11. Using what you learned, do those ones on your own. You can do it. All right, here's the independent practice, page 121. Let's check your work. So we have number 1, 350%. Now, to write this as a decimal, you could just move the decimal point. You could move it 2 to the left. You're dividing by 100. It's 3.5. Or you could go this way too. Watch. 350% is 350 over 100. That is a mixed number, is 3 50 hundredths. 3 50 hundredths is written 3.5 or 3.50. Let's simplify this to get our mixed number. Divide by 50, you get 3.5. So there's your mixed number in simplest form. Okay, for this one right here, It's smaller than 1, the percent is, so you have to move the decimal. So divide by 100 moves it 2 to the left. 2 to the left gets you 0.0015. Now, 0.0015 is your decimal answer. Let's turn this decimal into a fraction. It's in the 10,000ths place. So 15 10,000ths simplified, you divide by 5, you get 3 2,000ths. So that's your other answer. Writing the mixed number as a percent. So you have 2.5, you have to turn it into an improper fraction. 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5. 5 halves. You multiply by 50 so you can get 100 in the denominator. 250 hundredths. That's 250%. Sorry. I wrote 25. So 250% is the answer there. For number 6, write 9 3/4 as an improper fraction. 9 times 4 is 36, plus 3 is 9. Now, we have 39/4. Let's get 100 in the denominator so we can use the percent, times it by 25, you get 975%. All right, let's go to this one. Write each decimal as a percent. So for this one, you can do the simple multiply by 100, move the decimal 2 to the right. So 8.5 becomes 850%. 0.009, move the decimal 2 to the right, it's 0.9%. Your next step is to do the reflection for Learning Objective D in your math journal, and then the Learning Objective check-in. All right, let's take a look together at the Chapter 2, Lesson 4 reflection for Learning Objective D. I can write percents greater than 100 and less than 1 as decimals and fractions and vice versa. So number 1 is a fill in the blank. This number 1 correlates with page 118 when we're talking about what to do with percents greater than 100 and less than 1% when you turn the percent into a decimal and a fraction. So it says, to write percents as decimals, especially percents less than 1, I can blank by 100 and move the decimal blank places to the blank. So what are you doing, multiplying or dividing? How many places are you moving it? Is it to the left or the right? Now from there, I can change the decimal to fraction form and simplify. For percents greater than 100, I can always write the percent as a what when you put the percent over 100 and then simplify. So I want you to show your work. Change 0.6% into a decimal, write it as a decimal, and write it as a simplified fraction. And then this is greater than 100. This was less than 1. 230%. Write that as a decimal and write it as a simplified fraction. So remember, when it's less than 1%, you have to do this move the decimal method. Now number 2 correlates with this example 4 and what we wrote right here on page 119, turning a mixed number into a percent. So number 2 says, to write a mixed number as a percent, I first write the mixed number as an what kind of fraction? Then I write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of what? What kind of denominator do you need? Because the number in the numerator would then give you your answer. It would give you the what? Now I want you to show your work. Change the mixed number 1 3/5 and write it as a percent. Show your work here. There's one more on the back. Number 3. Number 3 correlates with examples 5 and 6, where you're writing decimals as percents and you have to do the move the decimal method. So number 3, to turn a decimal to a percent, I blank by 100. Are you multiplying or dividing? And I have to move the decimal how many places to the left or the right to get the percent? Show your work to write 1.09 as a percent and then 0.0008 as a percent. Notice that's in the 10,000ths place. Okay, after your reflection, make sure the teacher sees it and do learning objective check-in for learning objective. I think this is D.